I do worry that the constant barrage of illiberalism coming out of the White House makes us numb, and we forget that as citizens, we have to fight for what makes us unique and special as Americans, what makes us a beacon for everybody else, what gave us historically the authority to lead a community of free nations. If we don't defend it at home, how can we expect anybody else to want to live freely?
Pakistan has a new leader, and he's a looker. But can the former cricket star score any real wins in a country plagued by economic woes and rampant corruption? And how about that military and its tendency to want to, run everything? Hi, I'm Ian Bremmer, and welcome to your GZERO world. This week I sit down with Victoria Nuland, CEO of the Center for a New American Security and expert on Europe Today. Then I'll be taking your questions on office hours and on puppet regime. White House National Security Advisor John Bolton knows better than anyone that the revolving door at the White House can throw you out as quickly as it takes you in. Big league. But first, a word from the folks who help us keep the lights on. First to Pakistan, a nation we don't talk so much about here in the United States, but which has a nuclear arsenal and outsized influence in Afghanistan, India, and the larger region. Last month, Pakistanis voted for former cricket star Imran Khan to become their next prime minister. He's a bright and shiny object, to be sure, the country's most well-known celebrity, but one that might distract you from the real issues plaguing the country today. Being a political player in Pakistan is not for the faint of heart. In the 7 decades since their independence, Pakistan has successfully transferred power from one democratically elected government to another only one time. Khan will be the second. Indeed, no prime minister has ever served out a full term. Much of the media has understandably focused on the new president's movie star charisma and compelling biography, but it's the job he inherits and all the headaches that come with it that we should be looking at more closely. First, their economy is in awful shape and corruption is rampant. 50% of Pakistan's population currently lives in poverty. No Asian currency is performing worse this year than Pakistan's rupee, which has already been devalued 4 times since December. Their foreign exchange reserves are at a 3.5-year low, and the current account deficit of the country has exploded. Since the late 1980s, Pakistan has received no less than a dozen bailouts. They'll probably need one more from the IMF very shortly. Fixtures in Pakistan's political scene are 2 dynastic families who ostensibly run the country. One, Nawaz Sharif, now in jail, his family running one of the main parties, former Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto, her family running the other. Imran Khan actually defeated both to win. Think about Trump as celebrity beating both Hillary Clinton and Jeb Bush. Not all that different from what just happened in Pakistan. Khan himself rose to fame as a cricketer during the 1980s and 90s. He had a reputation for being a playboy. But after that, he shifted to Islam and politics, founding the Pakistan Justice Party in 1996. Far from his playboy days, now he's a pious Muslim and conservative politician who rejects Western values. It is this adherence to Islamist factions that won Khan the backing of Pakistan's military. In fact, many of his opponents have accused the army of interfering to boost the preferred candidate in the election. The military will likely handle security and foreign policy decision-making, particularly relating to India, Afghanistan, and the United States. Khan, in turn, will be given freedom to handle the ailing economy. Khan will benefit from that relationship personally, but Pakistan probably won't. On the international front, relations with the United States were lousy. They're not going to get any better. President Trump had already cut off aid for Pakistan because he felt they weren't providing enough support for the U.S. in Afghanistan. Imran Khan has already blamed the U.S. for butchery for their drone strikes in Pakistan. He's also referred to NATO as a group of Western liberals thirsty for blood. Let's say U.S.-Pakistan is probably going to be on the back burner for now. He's also not going to get much closer to India. He says that he wants a new opening with the Indian government, but the fact is that the military, which really controls Imran Khan's support, has no interest whatsoever, so they'll talk nice, but they won't do anything. The country you want to watch out for is China, because that's where the military is oriented, and it's also more money, which Prime Minister Khan really needs. At the end of the day, the big emerging economy in the region writing checks is the one that Khan's going to orient himself with. It's really tough to bet on any Pakistani prime minister. It's even tougher to bet on Pakistan's economy. That's enough from me. Let's hear from you. It's Office Hours, where I take questions from you via social media.
What will change the global world order the most? China's growth and Western stagnation? Maybe the industrialization happening in Africa, or something else?
Hi, Mikhail. Glad to have that question. Hope you're enjoying endless summer in Sweden. That is clearly the time to enjoy Sweden. It's clearly not Africa industrialization. We're talking 2% of the global economy. Africa can really only move the needle in the negative right now, which is sad. Not what I want to be saying. Over a longer time, maybe that's not the case. But for now, no, it's China. Why China? Because it's gone from being an emerging market, middle-income country to becoming a superpower economically and technologically. Not militarily, but on the economy and technology, they actually challenge the US-led global order. They're creating their own alternatives. They're writing the biggest checks. And other countries in the world are starting to think, hey, we can hedge towards China. Maybe we want to be more like them. Maybe we want their model. If China were like the United Kingdom, where it was a special relationship with the US, and so them becoming bigger didn't matter all that much for the way the world worked, I wouldn't care that much. But with China actually being both authoritarian and state capitalist, it's a dramatic transformation, and one that here in the United States, we don't feel as much. Everyone else in the world, like in Sweden, really does. That's it for this week. Remember that if you want your question answered, all you have to do is email a short video to submissions@gzeromedia.com and be a little lucky and have a good question. This week I sit down with Victoria Nuland. She's CEO of the Center for a New American Security and former Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs. Victoria Nuland, delighted to be with you.
Glad to be with you, Ian.
Big picture. For a long time, the Americans are fighting the Soviets, and it's an ideological battle, and we win. And there's a view then that, okay, we're kind of done with that now. And yet, you know, liberal democracy around the world is facing a lot of challenges right now. And certainly when you think about the American struggle today, whether it's against the Russians or it's against the Chinese, or it's with some allies like Erdogan in Turkey, there's a big problem. Right? You're not able to, the conversation is not about trying to convince them to become more like us. It's more, how do we coexist? How do we live together? How do you deal, as a policymaker, how do you deal with that kind of challenge as opposed to we're trying to defeat the Soviets? Because we're not trying to defeat the Russians, are we?
You know, I think I'm not going to say anything here that's cosmically new or insightful, but it's incumbent upon democratic leaders to ensure that the open, free trading system produces for average citizens, and that they see that the pie is growing and that their life is improving. Because otherwise, in every generation, you're going to have demagogues and strongmen who come along and say, I can do better for you, and who play on grievances rather than increasing opportunity and increasing the perspective of optimism.
Now, that's not just a Russian story,
It's
obviously.
not just a Russian story. It's a story here, I think. It's, you know, if you think about the difference between Ronald Reagan, who was the first president that I worked for in the 80s, and the way our current president approaches things, Ronald Reagan was all about morning in America. He was all about our infinite possibility as a polity, as a system, creating opportunity for people. There was an optimism that Americans gravitated towards. What I worry about is we're all about now that we've been ripped off, that we can't compete, that somebody else is taking advantage, and that it's zero-sum in terms of friends and allies rather than all of us together working to create more opportunity and more peace and security for everyone. So, you know, I think when people feel left out, they gravitate towards this sort of easy, angry fix. I think the tide will turn again, but not until, I think it might be hard without the United States playing its traditional role as a beacon of those values and that kind of optimism about human progress and about prosperity and openness.
So if you're the Europeans, what do you do in that environment? The German foreign minister is saying that they can no longer rely on the White House. That's a pretty startling statement. How do the Europeans, without the same level of leadership from the United States, make their way effectively?
Well, if you think of where Germany and France were at the end of World War II as completely battered and broken nations that had to be rebuilt, and where they are now as a result of their investment in free markets and democracy and the European Union and working together as a liberal family, they're among the richest, most successful countries on the planet. It's time for those leaders who are benefiting from that, who still believe in it, to stand up and preach its benefits, demonstrate its benefits to their people, and pose it as a successful alternative to all this autocratic talk and all this talk about the media being the enemy and independent judiciaries being the enemy. And if we're not going to do it, I hope that other liberal leaders will do it.
We've had Macron in power for 2 years now. We've had Merkel in power for a lot longer than that. I feel a bit from the way you're talking that you are not satisfied with what they're doing presently.
You know, in terms of standing up for liberalism, I don't think that they understood that they needed to at such a level until recently, and maybe until the culmination of the G7 summit and the NATO summit, where President Trump called into question all of these fundamental things. Have they understood that if they don't defend these things, they can't count on us to do it? So, you know, I'm optimistic, but they're going to have to speak louder, and they're going to have to speak to their publics, and frankly, they're going to have to speak to our public as well. Is this making America stronger, or is it just bringing us to a place where we are alone and potentially causing more problems for our own workers by cutting ourselves off from the rest of the world with high walls and tariffs and arguments among family, when we should, as a family, instead be working together against the real threats, like Putin, like a China that wants to also petition for different rules of the road.
So what's happening among the democracies right now that gives you some cause for greater optimism?
After the G7 summit, when our president, declined to sign up for all these rules of liberalism, the rest of them said, the rest of them said, but we do believe in these things and we think they make us stronger. The fact that despite all the unnecessary drama and questioning of the NATO institution that the president put out there on the first day, we nonetheless issued a statement among the 29 countries that spoke of increasing our strength to resist autocrats and to hold up our values and to deny Russia the legitimacy of incorporating Crimea and all those kinds of things. And that when the president tried to add on to that, Germany and France and the UK stood together and say, nope, this is what we agree on. We'll see how they do. But the fact that Germany remains prosperous, that France remains prosperous, that there's a better conversation now across the channel about Brexit gives me hope. I'm an optimist anyway, but I could also paint this pretty darkly for you, Ian, that, you know, if our going to war with our most important liberal trading allies over and adding tariffs and this and that begins to affect their economies, begins to affect our economy, we could drive the liberal family into a renewed recession. And who does that help? That doesn't make America great. It doesn't make anybody great.
When you look at all of these Western institutions and know that there are many people inside them that are questioning them, if you're going to focus on where you think the principal challenges to those institutions are right now, which of those institutions feel to you like they need the most bucking up, right? Where's the identity crisis at its greatest? You would say what?
It's not about the institutions right now. It is about the very idea that the United States leader seems to be more comfortable with autocrats and despots than he is with allies. And the risk then is that the U.S. will be left alone and will allow liberalism to atrophy, free markets to atrophy, and that not only will we not be shoring up the family of nations that have brought us to this level of prosperity and security and the institutions that undergird them, but our ineffectiveness, therefore, also with the dictators, will provide more opportunity for those folks to change the rules of the global order in their favor.
You think that Trump, if he had a choice, would prefer authoritarian systems to democracies around the world?
He's made that clear. He's made that clear. The free press is a hindrance. The independent judiciary is, slowing his role. He's taken on the fundamentals of the U.S. Constitution and our own values head on inside the United States in a way that is very similar to the rhetoric and tactics used by autocrats. I think it's really worrying.
Some, of course, have been successful over the past years. Democracies don't always say democracies. We've talked about Turkey, Hungary a little bit. Do you wonder that after 4 years, after 8 years, perhaps, of a Trump administration, that some of these institutions are not going to prove so resilient?
So far, the courts have been pretty resilient. So far, the free media has been energized by the attacks that the administration puts on it. But I do worry that the constant barrage of illiberalism coming out of the White House makes us inured, we're almost numb, and we forget that as citizens, we have to fight for what makes us unique and special as Americans, what makes us a beacon for everybody else, what gives us or gave us historically the authority to lead a community of free nations. If we don't defend it at home, how can we expect anybody else to want to live freely?
Do you worry that by focusing so much, not on the institutions and the structures, but on the man, Trump, and his predilection towards authoritarianism, given that the challenges of illiberalism are not just in the United States, they're in lots of other countries too, and Trump's only in the US, that we lose sight of a lot of other significant challenges?
I think almost all of the significant challenges that we have, whether they are inside the United States or whether they are challenges to the liberal, open, free system that has benefited us so much, require us to stand up to authoritarian tendencies and to support openness and to solve problems with innovation, to solve problems with increased collaboration and cooperation, not the building of walls and the slamming of doors and the raising of tariffs. That's going to leave us alone, and it's only going to benefit the richest of us. So from that perspective, I think the two pieces are interlinked. That, yes, it's important to call this moment what it is, which is a challenge to liberalism from the top of the American system, but also to strengthen those institutions that are standing up to and that are required to maintain the opportunity of liberalism.
But do you think that that challenge to liberalism is really only coming, or primarily only coming, from the top of the American system?
Oh, of course not. Of course not. You know, this is the problem. You've got an alliance of autocratic tendencies that is increasingly offering an alternative that is a really dangerous track to go down. So when Trump and Putin and Xi Jinping and Erdogan and Orban all use the same language about needing a strong leader who the press can't question, who the courts can't take on, who doesn't have to be transparent about his finances, who can operate to the benefit of a small group of people rather than everyone. That's the danger, Ian, is that we're starting to look like the folks that Trump's own national security strategy says are the greatest danger to the United States.
Victoria Nuland, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian.
And on puppet regime this week, John Bolton knows that any White House job in this administration can be fleeting, so he's looking into some backup day jobs. Let's have a look.
Hi there. Ian here with National Security Advisor John Bolton. Mr. Bolton, turnover has been high in this White House. Do you have a plan B in case this doesn't work out?
Well, I intend to stay and serve this president, but yeah, I've put out some feelers. I'm very sorry for your loss. As long as it's America's gain, it should be fine. Red is the color of regime change. Flight 395, you want to land, I want to know when the I can destroy Iran.
That's our show this week. We'll be right back here next week with Jared Cohen, CEO of Google's Ideas Lab called Jigsaw, and an expert on tech, national security, and cyber warfare. Don't miss it. In the meantime, if you like what you've seen, check us out at gzeromedia.com.